when I got home to Virginia, I remember getting in on the Greyhound bus that was around supper time, and um, I believe my brother-in-law and brother were both there to meet me. Of course, this town is so small they could get anywhere real quick. I think it was Leonard Wickland and my brother John, I believe. Um, but whatever, the family was all together. I called them from Camp McCoy to tell them what bus I was on and when I was coming. And they treated me like the lost hero or the whatever. And it was so good to be home, just so very good. And I don't know, somewhere or another, I think I didn't write home often when I was gone for those 34 months, I guess it was. But when I did, or when I came home on furlough a couple of times, I had 2 furloughs during that period, they had chop suey, and I liked that. And I must have mentioned it a couple times because they had chop suey, and then I was at a different person's home each of the nights, you know, Mitz and M and Ann and Phil and Mother, and I think John and Mars were in town then too. I'm sure they were. I'm sure he lived in Virginia then. And every time I went to another person's house, they would have chop suey. So yeah, it was a chop suey homecoming. And then some of the fellas had gotten home before I did. They'd been in the European theater, and they had short furloughs before they went over to Japan, and they got caught in the States, and the transportation wasn't quite as complicated as those of us who were in the Pacific trying to get home. But I still was one of the early ones to be discharged and to get home. And the whole town treated you in every way so positively. And it was such a good feeling. And I thought of that so often during the Vietnam War when those vets were treated so differently because of the kind of war it was. And World War II was a war that had very few, what would you call it, non-supporters. Everyone who lived in a democratic society felt that we were on the right side, and it was the right war to be in. The people at home were just so fantastic, and they made us feel so welcome. And then our friends that we hadn't seen for 3 years, guys we'd been in high school with, they were, of course, being discharged and coming back, and some of them had experienced things worse than I had. And we would celebrate each of their homecomings and gave us an extra reason to party, and we partied hard. And usually at whatever bar we were at, we couldn't buy a drink. You know, the bartenders would buy them for us, and the other guys who weren't in the military or didn't see combat were buying them. And you know, we had a lot of booze. If you didn't like it, you certainly plenty of invitation to get acquainted with that stuff. And then I remember a couple of incidents, especially one friend of mine that drank pretty heavily, even compared to our standards. He'd be partying by himself. We would ask him, say, Nellie, how come you were so slobbered last night? You were out by yourself. And so, who were you drinking with? And his answer was always, I was just drinking with some of my dead buddies. And it was true. It was true. He had a real rough time. And, he died very young, very bright guy. In fact, he was my roommate at UMD when I was in practice teaching, and Al Nellemark and I and Elmer, my old buddy, shared the apartment, and we paid for it together, the 3 of us, because I didn't have a schedule where I could get a part-time job. And mother went home and lived with Lenore, her mother. When I say mother, I'm talking about my wife, Gail. The three of us lived together, and we did some partying too. So Alan got his degree in spite of all the partying he did. I studied a heck of a lot more, and I did work hard at getting my degree. And other than that one quarter when the three of us lived together at our apartment that mother and I had these other jobs at Duluth to supplement my allotment because you couldn't support a wife and go to school with what the government gave us. You needed more than that. So I was a playground director, and I had a good job at Coolerator plant, working 40 hours a week. Okay, I should have gotten back to, I was talking about Alan Ellemark drinking with his buddies, dead buddies, and what a fantastic person he was. But he had seen a lot of tough combat, and he didn't even want to talk about it ever. But he died of alcoholism very young, very early on. And I remember when he, well, anyway, we'll get off Alan. Just getting back to Virginia and shortly after the war and all of the partying that we did. And then we began to settle down, and the parties weren't quite as frequent. And went to junior college and got back to playing football. That was something I did well at that time, and that was fun. And met mother while we were both in junior college, and we were married in July 7th, 1947, about a year and a half after I was discharged then. Mother and I met at one of these parties. She was with some other guy, and I noticed her right away. She's so pretty. But she didn't drink as much, but I guess she enjoyed partying, but she never, in my opinion, drank more than, a person should. And it just grew, and I guess she liked me too. But then we went on with our happy life and raised 9 children.